Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Fire Emblem, Crimson Flower in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 41, A Combined Effort. Lysithea was a student of the Golden Deer House. She was very different to many of the chaotic individuals around her peers. She was prim, proper, coordinated, and very much in need to manage and set her studies in a timely and proposed manner. Anything that so much as offset the balance of her work was bound to upset her, and she would give whoever and whatever did so hell to pay. In regards to looks, Lysithea was a small student. She had white long hair, which she organized every day accordingly, and a pale complexion she would do anything to not address. Her height was a severe hard spot to question her upon. Being one of the youngest in her class was something she was both very proud of and the least proud of. Their house leader, Claude, always made a point to tease her on it, but after having a few miasma spells launched on his face, him feeling groggy for a few days gave Lysithea a stern lecture from Professor Hanneman, as well as him actively avoiding tempering her. Naturally, she had her own secrets under burial. Nobody had even thought to ask her of them. She made certain not to reveal anything regardless. Being a girl with a crest of dubious origin was already a tricky secret to contain, let alone having two of them. Only those of the staff knew of it, though, and she trusted they could keep such a truth contained. Unfortunately, someone had already figured her out. Linhard was an annoying student. At least, nobody seemed to be bothered by his usual routines. Usually, he would study by himself in the library. Sadly, so did she. The two had the unfortunate incident on one occasion. She had accidentally revealed her second crest to Linhard when researching magic spells using a tome to help. None of the students were allowed one till they had certified, however with diligent studies, she was granted the use of such a book happily by Professor Hanneman. They were usually easy to handle. The book would usually treat their holders of the compatible magic level with ease, and as such, the Academy had locked their use behind the certification exams. Whilst it was true spells could be pulled off without the use of such an item, more advanced formations of mana and other such elemental energy was difficult to conjure unless one had a worthy tome beside their possession. Upon testing a spell, a yellow symbol of Lysithea's second crest had appeared on accident. Typically, most of the Golden Deers were far too rowdy to notice such incidents, and she had been lucky to keep it secret for so long. Linhard, a studious and self-educated student from a far different classroom environment, was another issue entirely. He noticed with one small glance, and so began to ask her about it. After concluding the girl to be possessing a somehow apparent second crest, he purposefully made it his duty to berate her on it. Somehow, he never thought to tell anyone else, which she was spitefully thankful for. Still, of all the Black Eagles, it just had to be Linhard. A while ago in the mock battle, Lysithea could have also sworn that Edelgard herself had also questioned her on her white hair, to which she was too stammered to reply. Unlike the majority of her own class, excluding Claude, Lysithea noted the Black Eagles were far more capable than she had hoped. She made it a point to avoid them. Today, however, she noticed Linhard once again in the library. He gave her an earnest smile, as if to thank her for her presence. Groaning to herself, she wanted more than anything to do as she did with Claude and throw a miasma spell his way. Unfortunately, the ruckus would have gotten her kicked from the library, and that was a risk she was never willing to take. Readying herself for his hounding of answers, she closed her eyes, only to be amused when Edelgard walked over to them, whacked Linhard with a book, and proceeded to drag him towards a table with Byleth already sitting upon it. Forgive his manners, she then told her, to which she could only wonder what was going on. He's got to help us with a new assignment, but he uses all his time escaping said duty, it seems. Yes. I gathered as much. She had never properly talked with Edelgard before. She very much expected her to berate her much like Linhard did, but this time on her unusually white hair. After all, it was one thing that Edelgard had paid special attention towards during the mock battle. Thank you. I'm glad to know not all the house leaders are complete fools. It flatters me that you would say such a thing, but Claude's a fool in attitude only. The man has his cunning, delicate nature hidden from sight, always. Lysithea nodded her head, much agreeing with this statement. Anyway, I suppose it is too early for me to be saying such things to you. Till next we meet, Lysithea. Oh, yes, of course. She was too nervous to speak properly. Edelgard remembered her name, apparently, and that was far too suspicious for Lysithea to properly pass. The same can be said for you, I suppose. The house leader nodded in acceptance before leaving. As Edelgard left back towards her table, Lysithea stood there in utter shock. She could finally study as she saw fit, but something had told her that Edelgard was just as curious as Linhard. At the very least, she appreciated that the girl had more tact than him. Thinking on it, Edelgard, too, had pale white hair. The imperial family was barely ever seen nowadays, so Lysithea had long assumed that it was simply hereditary. Could Edelgard have had a similar experience? Lysithea shrugged off that idea. She was the only exception. The consequences such circumstances brought was her own burden to bear. Finally returning to her own studies, she made it her duty to try and forget Edelgard and Linhard entirely. When coming back to his originally intended table, Linhard was unamused to find an annoyed house leader and disappointed professor. You can't exactly blame my attitude if I didn't want to be here in the first place. That would usually be the case, if only you weren't actively avoiding us for over half an hour, Edelgard replied, still annoyed. After all those classes, you somehow managed to escape our sight and lay undetected for that long. It's honestly impressive as to what lengths you go to avoid work. I can tell that's not your attempt at flattery, Edelgard, but consider this. Sitting down on his chair, he looked over at his house leader with his unusually utmost attention. The skills I am choosing to learn in my own time, I find will be much more beneficial for me in the future. I'm making my own effort in my own way, and I'm sure you'll come to agree in time. And just what effort are you talking of? Edelgard asked, genuinely curious. They say that results are the best form of proof. So you never planned to tell me to begin with? Byleth, who had been watching the scene unfold, did not truly know how to react. If Byleth were with him, she would have certainly quelled the fires raging between the two. Unfortunately, Rhea had made it a point that he was in charge of them. He noted the Archbishop had, for some reason, always taken an interest in him over his sister. He wondered why, but never thought to bring it up to one such as her. I believe you two can settle this dispute another day. We have work to attend towards. Finally figuring out how to silence his students, they both adhered to his command. Well, fine. I suppose we should get this underway already. We don't have all day, after all, Linhard groaned. You wanted us to brainstorm why some common rogues would be after the monastery to begin with, correct? At this, Byleth nodded his head. I will try and provide help where need be, but Lady Rhea herself has asked for you to manage this task together as a duo. It must have been after that fine display Caspar put us through yesterday. Edelgard figured, unamused. Just thinking about my behavior and how I joined in his victory is embarrassing. Yes, well, the past is the past. Let's just get this underway, okay? You're right, Edelgard acknowledged. Byleth noticed almost immediately that when the two worked together, they had both been surprisingly cooperative. If there's one lesson I know, it's that we can never change the outcome of what goes through the passing of time. We need only focus on figuring out everything someone would want from the monastery, to ensure its future is kept safe. I've already got a few ideas twiddling my mind as is. The same for I as well. We have far more to work with than one would like. Immediately, all three of the group had focused on Edelgard's conjectures. Everything from the monastery can be considered valuable. I hear the goods supplied from the mess hall are always of the finest quality, and anything slightly out of date goes away immediately. Of course that's the wish of a common thief's dream. We can't expect someone who wrote a letter as daring as that to simply be the average fit, however. Correct. Edelgard, unknowingly, had ended up finding herself passionately working with her peer now. This very library is another specimen of examination. From the rumors I hear, Seath inspects every book before it even steps foot within a shelf here. Linhard recounted old memories. On one instance, he even took a book away from me when he realized it wasn't what the church deemed acceptable. Vexing as it may be, that at least confirms of the rumor's solidity. Books are expensive as is. We can imagine this place is worth to be more than just a handful of billions. Maybe an entire stack, even. Considering the thieves already knew how to read and write from that letter, I suppose we can rule out the cafeteria, but count this place dash. I'll put that thought on hold for a minute. Linhard stopped his classmate from continuing her theory. Getting here requires entry through the main halls underground, and seeing as the entrance and exit is a one-way trip, it would be a fool's initiative to steal from here. Fair point. Before continuing, Edelgard thought it best to follow as Linhard did and rule out more places left for investigation. That also leaves out the greenhouse and our classrooms. Those places in particular are on public access on the right of Rebirth Festival, and judging from those sheets everyone signed, they're already going to be heavily guarded. The same can be said for the cathedral. As holy and valuable as those statues of the saints are, they're far too big to make any running attempt with, and much of that place's value lies within its architecture as a whole. It would take one far too long to ensure anything from there is taken, even more so because of it being yet another area of public access during the festival. Strange, thinking back on it, I didn't realize just how valuable of a place this monastery and the academy within it was. It is a thief's treasure trove, Byleth concluded. Any rogue would dream of raiding this place if left empty. Rhea would never allow it, though. Both Byleth and Edelgard were left in thought. Never before had they realized just how powerful the church and its secrets were. It was even likely they had failed to mention even more places the monastery housed, and that was solely because of the vast historical importance of the area. It was both an inspiring and vexing ordeal, especially as Edelgard and Linhard were expected to narrow down its truest form of value in little under a month. On that note, we can finally move on to what I personally believe is the very best place for a thief to visit. Believe it or not, I wanted to save its mention for last, but only because the area actually interests me. At this, Edelgard stopped being lost in her thoughts and perked herself up in befuzzlement. Figures you would be passionately willing to suggest an area of the monastery you wanted to research. What did I miss, then? The Holy Tomb, Linhard concluded. Whilst not normally mentioned, anyone who inquires about the church's history can find out about it. It's an area they keep secret, but not secret enough that the public aren't allowed to know of it. Fitting, the thieves we're working against most likely planned this all out, judging from the letter. It's more likely they would have known about the tomb, then. What is in the tomb that is so valuable? Byleth asked, however this only gave Linhard a saddened expression. That's the one key problem we're dealing with. The tomb's such an enigma, that all we know at best is that it's valuable, but not how so. I've been doing my own research in my own time, and I found that some say that it is where the goddess remains herself are stored. You're not one to jest, Linhard, Edelgard reacted, shaken. Were your sources to this rumor credible? As credible as the Knights of Sirios in charge of guarding it? Yes, Linhard answered. Some simple eavesdropping in my spare time managed to find such information, although I must admit that I had my own troubles sneaking in there, and even at best I could only get one look at it dash. Linhard. Byleth admonished him before he could continue, startling the two before their investigations could continue. Do not be doing such actions again. You must note your behavior reflects me and sister as a whole, alongside your entire class. Yeah, he dismissed. Whilst Byleth had misinterpreted his response as understanding, Edelgard knew herself that he meant none of his half-hearted apology. That being said, I myself can confirm that whilst it's heavily guarded from the outside, almost none of the interior itself is well defended. That can only mean that Rhea herself doesn't want anyone, not even the knights, knowing what exactly is in there. Correct. But does that not make it the same as this very library? Edelgard quickly cut back upon their investigations before concluding. There's only one way to enter, and one way to exit. There's where the issue from before completely vanishes itself towards delicate extremes. Had we never had that letter being written to begin with, I myself would have been the one abusing this predicament. Linhard faced Edelgard, startling her as this was the most focused she had ever seen him. The entrance just so happens to be within the public area that everyone can roam across during the festival. So long as the knights are kept busy, one can most assuredly find themselves weaving in and out of public's notice without so much as a glance, unlike this library, which would be both off limits, and heavily guarded from both the outer and inner parameters. Then we can only arrive at one and only one single conclusion. The Holy Tomb is where they wish to attack the place. And the assassination towards Rhea was a hoax to begin with. As Edelgard finished off their united conclusion, Byleth had noticed smiles on both their faces. Even if the two bickered together, they were surprisingly nimble in mind when their interests had aligned themselves. And you wonder why I annoy you to put your effort elsewhere. I didn't put my interest elsewhere this time, Linhard deflected. They simply were one and the same on this rare instance. Do not expect much from me after all this is over. From Edelgard's annoyed expression, the peace was once again broken. Byleth made a mental note to himself to report to both Rhea and his sister that the two, whilst surprisingly willing to help each other when the time called for it, still had a long way to go. I think both of you have proved yourself useful today, Byleth interjected before they could once again begin another fight. Let us call it a night. Much time has passed while we talked, and if I recall, Linhard desired a rest before we even began our investigation. I'm not exactly sleepy anymore, but I appreciate the sentiment all the same. Linhard more than readily began leaving his seat. This is the perfect time I can bid you both farewell. Do be sure to give me notice if you require my assistance once more. I work on an abnormal timetable, as you both must already know. We'll be ignoring your abnormal timetable, regardless, Edelgard sighed. But before I end up losing myself again, I do want to thank you for all the help you provided today. It goes both ways, Linhard agreed. As I hate to admit it, I will only say it once, but you are rather enjoyable to work with when you don't berate me. As are you. Linhard finally made his exit, leaving both Byleth and Edelgard alone. They both thought it best to accompany one another to ensure Edelgard made it safely to her dorm. Whilst she was perfectly capable of defending herself, Byleth thought it only common courtesy to ensure she could make it safely. As the two walked alone in darkness, Edelgard thought back to her prior memories. It was around this time that I had told you of my past experiences. You are correct, Byleth replied, dryly. You don't waste your breath, Edelgard smiled. To tell you the truth, after I had told you of it, I spent the rest of that night worrying that I had been too rash with my yearning to share my past with you, but over time, you've shown me that it was not such a bad decision. Edelgard was finding herself too cautious to continue. A moment of silence began before Byleth noticed it was his moment to respond. I can understand wanting to keep prior memories tightly locked away. Me and father are much the same, we prefer not to let sister remember her past battles. It had been a while since he worried for Billet. Thinking on it, he felt that his acceptance of becoming a professor at the academy was not such a bad decision. What made you believe you did not make a mistake in entrusting your past experiences to me? Once more, silence had arrived for a moment. Edelgard gave it some thought, but then realized she felt safe entrusting more of her thoughts to Byleth once more. You're an inspiration. Over the past 2 months I've been your student. I've admired your level-headedness and ability to work under any circumstance. Had you been in my role as a future emperor, like me, I believe you could even do better than I at the role. You may be silent in nature, but the ability to not act rashly is one that is hard to accomplish and utilize. Thank you. It was only right for him to offer his gratitude, however Byleth felt that Edelgard had put herself down far too much. You already have the making of an emperor yourself. You are the most responsible of the class, and you carry your pride with proof, always readily willing to shoulder any responsibilities given to you. I can only hope I'm doing it correctly. Edelgard looked at the night sky, stars twinkling towards her eyes. I hope to shoulder much more than that, after I graduate and become an emperor. Just how much more do you wish to carry alongside you? The entire of Fodlan, if given the opportunity. Byleth was taken aback by this response. Without realizing it, he found himself smiling alongside his most trusted student. I believe you can do it, he said. Without a doubt, I firmly believe you are the one capable of becoming an emperor, not I, but you. She felt herself flush with embarrassment at this response. Still, it warmed her worries upon hearing this. Edelgard thought to herself, realizing these were the words she had always longed to hear. Just once, someone who was not her vassal had believed in her abilities. That was all she needed. Thank you, Professor. With the burden of Fodlan itself on my one shoulder, I'll carry your absolute faith and trust in me on my other. I am pleased to hear it. Finally, they had approached the building's entrance that housed Edelgard's quarters. She turned back to her teacher, bidding him a night farewell. Notify me when I'm required to investigate with Linhard again. Unlike him, I'll abide by your wishes any time of day. She began opening the door, and before closing it, she said her parting words. Good night, Professor. The same for you as well. Byleth turned back, thinking upon the conversation he had just had. Shifting his eyelids across, he noticed the rustling of bushes nearby. His hand gripped his dagger from his waist, but in little less than a few seconds, the rustling had ceased. Of course. He was being watched, but the assailant had made their retreat. That person is a crafty one, I shall give you that, Suthies remarked, appearing beside him. More importantly, did I see a smile approach your face before? Suthies pointed her hands accusingly at her vessel, however his stone-cold expression now could not confirm her past viewings. Of course you have nothing to say, she muttered. You are a boring carrier of my desires. Do you know that? You have spared no effort to make it known to me, he recounted. Shall we retire for the night? I suppose it is only right, Suthies replied, disappointed in never confirming the previous emotion Byleth had shown. Farewell, Byleth. Call if you need me, Suthies. The girl had retreated within her usual place yet again. Just as everyone had done on this very night, Byleth retreated to his quarters. Just out of reach, he and Suthies did not know of Beletta's challenging seath and promise to Flayn, and neither would he have known of the past argument that went on between the other pair of siblings as their class was being held. For everyone this night, progress had been made. Different destinies interwoven with one another, only for them to one day clash and collide as the rite of rebirth's deadline approached. Chapter 42, The Optimistic Trio. It had taken place years ago. He had ran endlessly trying to find her in his younger days. He heard rumors and hearings of running aways, defection, and escapism. He still continued, pushing through crowds just to see her. Soldiers had come after him. He was not safe. He fought them, endlessly screaming her name. The one person he was in charge of most to protect was her, and he felt a sense of failure at not being able to do so. He continued going for what felt like a long while. As little as 3 days seemed to some, he had managed to survive against all the odds in the world to make it this far. He was not successful. He could only cause so much bloodshed before the public had noticed, and once he was held down, his father could only give him the most disappointed of looks. He did not care. Most of all, he wanted to know if she was all right. You told me to protect her. Gritting his teeth, he screamed. Why aren't you letting me do it, then? Promptly afterwards, he was knocked out cold, lying limp on the ground as a result of his father's commands. Frustration filled him on that day. He had reached his limits with the world. He was being challenged, and his duty was being propelled against him. It was a long time later he could meet her again. Far too much time had passed. Long after all of the drama had ceased, he wandered the halls of the Adrestian palace, only to see her. Her uncle left her, not so much as giving a signal of notice for her presence. Her hair had changed. It was not the humble brown shade it had once been. He ran to her, recognizing her face. Although she was paler and poorer than before, he knew this was the Adrestian princess. He did not care anymore if wanting to see her was his own selfish ambition. She needed help, and her uncle was not providing it. Lady Edelgard, he shouted to her. Please, tell me you are all right. Upon closer inspection, she was shaking most violently. Her smile had all but ceased, and a look of horror could only be seen on her face. After much prodding and gesturing, Edelgard finally looked at him. A tear finally came through. This was the first time she had seen someone else of recognition after all she had been through. Hubert. Lady Edelgard. He grabbed her shoulders, forgetting all responsibilities and etiquette he was taught before. Your hair. What happened? Hubert. I dash. Her uncle called for her. Like someone possessed, she walked towards him, however still looked back at the servant who cared for her most in the palace. Looking at her authority figure, Hubert clenched his fists. The man, clothed in unfitting white robes, yielded a hostile expression towards his small interaction with the young princess. "Your father has warned you about making the royal family's personal affairs your own," he spoke. "Would you want me to report to Count Vestra of your actions this day?" He was not afraid. He hated his father, and he hated her uncle. Most of all, he cared only for providing the princess safety. Still, realizing he was being proposed a ceasefire, he shook his head sideways, silently watching as a smile crept across the man's face from seeing this response. They left. After years of fighting and questioning all those events from long ago, he had found only a small part of the answer for what happened during the time they parted ways. The princess was not herself. Her hair was the sole proof for it, and he was sure nobody would be foolish enough to notice her aghast expression. "Bastard," he muttered. Returning back to the dormitory, Hubert hid himself within his room, listening for footsteps from beyond his door. Once confirming that Edelgard had returned to her place of rest, he sighed to himself. Anyone who he left with her, no matter what pedigree they were from, they always had the chance of taking advantage of the princess. She had ambitions. It was too soon to stop or defame her name. Most of all, Hubert wanted to prevent what had transpired all those years ago. Sitting down on his bedside, he felt annoyed at the interaction she had just had. "Professor Byleth and little assistant Billet," he muttered. "My role as her vassal requires me to harness all suspicion against all third parties. It would be far too long before they are safe from me." He realized that he had to let his worries fade for tonight. He had confirmed the princess was safe, and had ensured the professor was not a threat for now. Attending to his own rest, he tried to feign ignorance for just a little longer. The next day arrived. Much to most of the students' dismay, those who chose to guard the various areas of the monastery were expected to wake up at the earliest peaks of the day. During this time of paranoia, some had managed to align their duties with that of their friends, and so small groups had been formed between the lucky few to ease the hardships this month had brought with it. Ash had been lucky to be invited by Annette and Mercedes to guard the library. Making his way towards the two, he waved as they noticed him. After all that had happened prior, Professor Manuela had instructed him to take care of only himself for the time being, and whilst he still could not urge the frustration out of his body, he had eased himself with the presence of those close to him in the Blue Lion house. "Glad to see you could make it, Ash." Mercedes offered a smile. "A shame we can't study here, though." Annette sighed to herself, however she promptly brightened up when noticing Ash took notice. "Oh, but it's still great to be safeguarding this place with you and Merci. We can definitely make this time go by much faster till we're relieved of our duties." She bumped her fists up in the air. Annette and Mercedes were a close pair. Having studied together at the Sorcerer's Academy before making it to the Officer's Academy, they had grown together as a result. Still, they were both regarded by others for their friendly nature. This was a relief, as during his time of mourning, their generosity had helped Ash after the last month's events. Of the pair, Annette was a small girl. She sported the Academy's signature uniform at its finest, and her curled orange hair had made it clear she made an effort to maintain good appearances. She was well known for having each little task given to her all finished in true form and order. Still, that did not mean she was dismissive of others. Regardless of appearance, many had noticed she maintained a bubbly positive attitude towards everyone, making her one of the most approachable students in the Academy. One small thing of note, however, was just to make sure she was never near anything of a fragile nature. Annette had a habit of clumsiness when the worst of times arose. Thankfully, to counter this, she had Mercedes. She was much older than her friend, but was also more softly spoken as a result. With fair brown hair flowing across her back, she always harnessed a motherly smile to those she met. Just like Annette, she was known to be the friendliest of students at the Academy, and if prompted, she would more than happily bake a sign of friendship for those she cherished. After all that had happened, Annette, who was previously an acquaintance of Ash, had noticed his changed demeanor, and after a talk with Mercedes, the two resolved to cheer him up. This effort had worked in the little time they were given before the assembly, and in just a few days they had become a trio of friends, regardless of how new Ash was to the group. He felt he could talk of anything with the two, even if they were not directly involved with his troubles. It's a good thing we're guarding a library, if I'm going to be completely honest. Once this is all over, we can head back to work and catch up on what we missed. Oh yeah, Annette said, with much excitement at this seemingly mundane realization. I can't wait. Don't go entertaining her, Ash, Mercedes chuckled. Annie'll keep us all hostage for far longer at this rate. Hey. The trio chuckled at this realization. Once they returned to their usual watchful duties, they had noticed many students coming and going within the library as more time passed. Among those that came through, was the professor of the Black Eagles, alongside their house leader and Linhard. I hope you intend to cooperate with our speculations more this time, Linhard, Edelgard pondered aloud to her peer. Don't go slacking off either. I can see you have your eyes on those books to your side. Yeah, he yawned, still having to get used to the timing their meeting had taken place in. Just leave me and my personal studies to me, okay? They noticed much to his dismay, Byleth had almost given up trying to calm their bickering. Annette, who had been one of those who attended the library most often, felt this must have been because despite their constant indifferences, the small occasions the two worked best together had made up for their fights. Still, it certainly gave the trio a much more nuanced look at the supposedly uptight leader of the Black Eagles. Seeing this has reminded me, aren't all the professors pretty uptight right now? Annette asked, as the group watched Byleth observing his students struggle to work together. We've certainly seen Professor Manuela give us numerous warnings before, and the same can even be said for Professor Hanneman. Mercedes thought aloud. Yeah, but what about Professor Juritshaw? Juritshaw. Mercedes took some time to think of him. As her voice trailed off into silence, suddenly the curiosity of her friends had been alerted. You okay, Merci? Thinking of her sessions with him, Mercedes could have sworn there was something completely off about their fighting instructor. Of the few chances that she had seen him looking out for the training grounds, Mercedes could have sworn he had averted all eyes towards her whenever she saw him. I can't quite put my finger on it, Mercedes pondered. It's just that something about Professor Juritshaw seems familiar, somehow. The two of her friends looked puzzled. Still, ignoring her confusion, Ash looked around at the silence of the library. It was hard to imagine that such a place would be sought after by those outside of the academy. Maybe you'll figure out why someday. Annette comforted her friend, however it was clear that Mercedes was yet to be completely convinced. I have heard he has his own fair of work to be doing this month, so I doubt we'll be seeing him much. Ash joined in finally, wanting to distract her from her worries. Still, can you really believe that Lady Rhea wants us to guard the entire monastery? It's hard to believe what such a person would want out of this place. Oh, that reminds me, Annette bobbled her head back up in realization. But I've heard the books here are pretty expensive. Hardcover copies are harder and harder to find nowadays. I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case here. I suppose you're right, but it barely feels like we're guarding this place with so few people here. I wonder if the other students looking at the other areas of the monastery feel the same way. Annette looked across the corridor from outside the library. It's only been a week, but I'm sure everyone's still on edge. I can only hope nothing happens. You both are all gloom and doom today, huh? Mercedes said. Just wait till those stalls fill themselves with tasty treats towards the end of this month. When this is all over, we can all go treat ourselves. That does sound like a yummy conclusion. Annette thought. I'm down if you both are, in that case, Ash smiled, agreeing. They nodded their heads together. After much decision-making, now they were more motivated than ever to get back to their work. Looking at the corridor ahead, they were happy to be working alongside one another during this ordeal, for it made time go by much faster. This was the same circumstances that every student in the academy was going through. With an early start and late end to the day, they would make idle chatter as they continued to valiantly observe the academy. Elsewhere, the knights had all been dispatched towards investigating the outer town and beyond. Almost everyone was busy, and this especially had included the odd group of a professor and two students inside the library. So it's agreed then, Professor? A voice rang out curiously from the table. He'd have to honor our wishes at some point, right? As some time was given for Byleth to give his final verdict, he thought about whether this was the right thing to be doing. Recalling back to it, he recognized that Rhea had given them her full permission to exercise freedom in their investigation. Nodding his head to himself, he looked at Edelgard and Linhard with confidence. Yes. I will ask Lady Rhea for her permission as soon as I am able to for us to go inside the Holy Tomb. In the meantime, I trust you both will continue looking at other avenues. Of course, Edelgard agreed. Whenever we can, of course, Linhard added, staring sleepily at his book. With this goal in mind, the three resolved once more after much consideration of their next choice. Chapter 43, Letter of Unknown Origin. Geralt was already having enough of his duties when he first started his job again, however with the month's worries, he felt he needed a deep rest after it had all been done with. Still, he felt he had to see to it that his work was finished, no matter how fatigued he felt. Feeling a presence entering the room, he tried his hardest not to look up from his office. His paperwork had exceeded that of the many, however his patience was whittling as he wrote. Looking down on him, Seath had felt bad for his circumstances. Take rest when you can, Geralt. Look who's talking, he joked, mockingly. My kids are at it till death do them part, so it's only right for their own father to further their example. At this, Seath sighed. To correct you, only one of them is doing such things. Professor Billette is out providing moral support, but at best she is merely there for convenience. Harsh words to say to her father, you think. I meant no offense by such words, of course. I distrust you, but I do not doubt your skill. It's a tight bridge you're walking on. Gotta keep making it, trying to make it less of that, I guess. As he busily chipped away at his piles of work, Geralt had a realization. Hold on. I don't think you have any right to tell me to get some shut-eye when you're quite the workaholic yourself. I am the Archbishop's advisor. You may be a captain of the Knights of Sirios, but as expected, you being new to your old job means that most of your mistakes will be overlooked. I appreciate you being blunt about it, Geralt thanked, thinking about his days of old. In the mercenary job, the best clients were those who were the most honest. At this, Seath chuckled. That goes for most jobs, then. So long as you do your task, I will try my best to assist you. Even if the first thing you want is us turning tail out of the monastery. Geralt asked, joking. Yes, Seath answered, bluntly. Geralt could only sigh at this daft response. In his mind, he thought his colleagues were not the most entertaining to work with. Still, Seath was cooperative at least. He disliked him and the twins, but had accepted his disliking had no impact over his job. It took a lot of patience and tolerance to show these traits, and as a result, Geralt had found himself respecting the advisor more than he thought he would. Seath carefully maneuvered his way outward to look upon the window behind Geralt. Noticing the passing of sunset, he could only pity the piles of papers left for Geralt to overlook. Would you like me to help take over for you? I appreciate the generosity. Finally, Geralt turned his head around to face him out of gratitude. But I honestly don't mind the late finish. I see. He understood, albeit with disappointment in his voice. So be it. He realized that his attempt at helping the rough situation of the month had ceased any rates of success. Resigning to himself, Seath knew it was best to turn around and make his leave. He gave one final word of goodbye to Geralt, who gave no response back, before he drew closer towards the door. The hell? He stopped in his tracks. Hey, advisor, forget the kindness. You may want to know about this. He turned around, suddenly displaying a face of a tense nature. Making sure the door was closed, he walked to Geralt. Immediately all prior formalities had ended, and the two looked at the next batch of documents that Seath had left to fill out. Who the hell let these twisted letters reach the office? Geralt felt sick to his core. His fatigue now finally showed. This is the stuff serial killers use. Picking up the letter, Seath immediately figured out what Geralt had meant. On the paper, with scrunched up, stuck on, and twisted writing was a letter requesting a challenge. The spelling had been completely muddled, and not just one source of writing seemed to be cut up and stuck on in parts of the letter. Usually this is done to hide the assailant's handwriting, but you can clearly see some letters written with someone's penmanship. Hold on, never mind. Seath now made a startling realization. Some of the written letters are cursive, and others are completely unreadable beyond recognition. This letter could very well have been a collaborative effort. What handful of idiots would work on signing a death threat with their own handwriting, though? Those are my thoughts exactly. Seath muttered words of annoyance to himself. Goodness sake. This is not what I wanted to deal with this month. Nobody wants to go on with this, Geralt assured. Especially now of all times. This crap shouldn't be here in the first place. The two were now growing agitated. Deciphering the letter, they recognized immediately what it was asking for, and suddenly the reasoning as to it being sent to the Knight's Post had become much more clear. It's requesting for you, Seath inferred. The authors want your head on the right of rebirth. They'll go after anyone else if you don't attend, putting the church in an unfavorable position. A groan came from Geralt. As much as he hated it, he also was not new to these sorts of bribes in his time as a mercenary and a father. Usually, though, his children were capable of making it through them, however the general public was a different story. He sighed, before taking the paper for himself. Go on ahead and do what you do best. I'll entertain this bastard. A surprised expression arose. Excuse me. This person has likely threatened multiple people to write this letter, sticking on their own bit with broken newspapers whenever they felt they should. Locating just one of these people with so few of their handwriting pieces would only confuse us, and the chances of them being willing to talk could be next to nothing if we're unlucky. As much as you'll hate me doing so, I'll meet with this person on the right of rebirth. Any casualties as a result will be my responsibility. He was surprised at his sudden authority, but was also reassured by it. Whilst unable to completely let the situation go, Seath at least understood that an effort was being made for normalcy in this turbulent time. Thank you, Geralt. Making his leave, he looked back, trying his best to smile. Just know, whatever happens, I shall try and back you up with all I can. Request for me and the knights if needed, and I'll even make sure Rhea is made aware not to punish you too gravely if things go awry. Geralt felt assured from this offer. You hate my guts, but you're reasonable as all hell. I like clients like you. Seath did not know how to take this compliment, but he nodded his head all the same. Closing the door, Geralt left himself to take a look at the letter once more. Usually, he would request help for this sort of thing, however those who knew his fighting style best were busily teaching, and he did not consider the knights to be of his caliber. Haven't had a solo mission in a while, he said, with a smirk. I'll treat myself to plenty booze after all this. Often if a hostage situation arises, Byleth lectured his class, unaware that Billet and Suthies beside him were taking more interest in this information than they should have. It is best to consider other possibilities. Sometimes, even complying with orders is a good idea, however bringing suitable equipment or adjusting your own convoy with hidden tactics can greatly reduce the outcome of your losses, so long as you can be aware of what is at stake and manage it precisely. Finally shaking her head out of fascination, Billet quickly got up to summarize what was said in simple terms. Yeah, so hostage situations aren't fun. They're a pain to deal with, and even a hassle to come out of. Still, in the event one does happen, there are ways to turn them in your own favor, assuming you can come up with them. The twins looked at the class. Today, they had discussed a more grim topic than usual. They noticed some had silently looked at one another, as if they were imagining what could be at stake if one were to happen. A hand raised upwards. What about if we were to seek help when put under pressure? Edelgard asked. Everyone looked at her when asking this, almost as if they were hoping this was a satisfactory outcome. That's where things get tricky, Billet answered, with sameness in her voice. Usually that's the best way to win, but it's also the most predictable. It's honestly very likely that your enemy will know this, and at times, they'll specifically ask for you not to seek help. Honestly, I hate saying this, but it's all down to you if you think that getting help will cost you a loss or not. That said, Byleth began concluding the lecture. All of these circumstances are different. We may seem knowledgeable about them, but one day it is likely you will slander me and sister's names as a result of not going into detail. These are times where tables can be turned on all sides, and all hope would seem inconsequential. At best, we can only tell you a rough sketch of what to do during these times, however me and sister still thought it was important to go over this topic at this time. Is it? Ferdinand thought aloud. Because we are in our own hostage situation. A chuckle could be heard from Hubert at this moment. I see. That's a clever, yet grim example, Professor. We're being threatened with Lady Ria's head in exchange for whatever's most valuable to the monastery. It's a twisted situation, Edelgard surmised, agitation filling her voice. Everyone once again fell into silence. It hurt to see them like this for Belette. Still, she had an idea for something to motivate them. She tiptoed towards her brother, whispering her idea to him. It will come out of your part of the funding, he replied, to which the class attention was once again brought to the twins. You don't exactly play nice, but I'll take what I can get. Belette flashed a grin, cheekily. All right, y'all. What say we get ourselves a shopping trip through town once all this is over? I'll make the food funds on me, and if I've got cash to spare, I'll go get us some stuff to buy, too. At first, the offer went through everyone's heads. After some thought was put in to realize what exactly their professor had offered, a loud gasp in realization could be heard from all sides of the class. Wait, Bernadetta squeaked. But Bernie doesn't want to head out to where people are. I'll make it a people-free day for you, then. Belette cheered, already considering her anomaly of a student. We'll bring you some snacks and gifts and leave it at the door, or you can tell us what to get you. My very own delivery service. Bernadetta realized, with a smile on her face. Whoa. Awesome. All the other students had other ideas, however. Each of them chatted to each other now, completely forgetting what was happening and their reasoning for such a lecture on this day. Professor, I have a very well thought out and conclusive response to that offer. Casper stood up from his seat. Hell yeah. I'm down. Me, as well, Dorothea added. I'll appreciate the hospitality and take it, so long as Lady Edelgard does. Hubert bargained. You're coming with us, Hubert. Edelgard closed the deal. I will be enjoying this time greatly. Petra gleamed. Can I be with Bernadetta on this one? The class all looked over at Linhard, unsurprised. Yeah, Belette replied, unamused. Do what you want. Splendid. He smiled, unexpectedly. Thank you, Professor Belette. Edelgard thanked, to which everyone else had offered their appreciation in a chain as a result. Seeing their smiles had made her efforts very worth it to her. Feeling proud of herself, Belette gave a wink and a smile at everyone. Good luck getting the funding, Suthies remarked. I would not be doubting her skills at this moment, Suthies, Byleth corrected his celestial guest. Explaining the reasoning behind it all. It may not seem like it, but when it comes to matters of social status, Sister is surprisingly adept. The class had all left now. In helping clean up the class, it was clear the smug look had not been cleared off of Beletta's expression. Byleth grew curious as to her mindset now. What is your angle, sister? Oh, nothing. Don't worry. This response only made her brother more curious. Spit it out already. Suthies shouted, clearly less patient than Byleth on this matter. All right, Belette teased. I'll just be owing Seath a little after all this is over. Oh, and I'll be counting on you to help pull us a win this month. The little trio, brother, Edelgard, and Linhard, do me a solid and get it right this month. I'll need it for my ongoing battle. You have only confused us, sister, Byleth replied, disappointed. That's all I'm giving you both. You are such a tease. Suthies threw a tantrum. She wanted to push Byleth, but completely phased through him in trying to do so. What I'd give for you to be my vessel instead of this lug of bricks. Excuse me. Byleth replied, confused, however Suthies fell on the floor as she ran through him. Belette laughed out loud in hysterics. The two seemed confused, but after calming herself down, she sat on the table behind her. After wiping a tearful laugh from her cheek, she gave an earnest and sincere smile. I'm glad you're with us, Suthies. I don't know why you're here, but I like it when you're around. You are overly compassionate. She did not know how to respond to this compliment. It was far blunter than she would have expected. I simply think you both are here for my own desires. Granted, you both have not made much effort in looking into who I truly am, but, maybe. I too, like the company you have given me. Ditto, Billet agreed. I doubt your sleepy throne was much of a talker to begin with. Thrones do not talk at all, sister, Byleth said, completely missing the brunt of her joke. I see what you mean, Suthies. He's absolutely dense. As they both agreed over this fact, Byleth had noticed that not all of the room had been cleaned out yet. Motioning for his sister to join in, the two made their way towards finishing up for the day. The training grounds were being occupied once more. This time, Casper had unfortunately been assigned with guarding the entrance into the underground hallway, so this had left Petra to tend to her usual combat style. She did not notice, however, that a pair of eyes had been silently watching her. I can see you can put up a good fight on your own, Hubert had inferred, startling her. So what say you to a duel? Before responding, Petra took some time to look upwards into the sky. As it happened, the orange tint had meant that the evening was about to say its final farewells, however this did not mean Petra was willing to yield to their curfew yet. Taking up her training sword once more, she gave a pleased smirk towards Hubert. Very well. We shall begin the fighting. Excellent. He moved away to the side, fishing up his own wooden training sword from the wreckage of rusted and bruised weapons the student body had all shared. Do not fret. Protecting Lady Edelgard all these years has meant that I've had much to swing at when the time called for it. I see, Petra thought. I should not be pleased at such a time, but it gives me much readiness to be having a spar with you. Nothing you can do about it, I suppose. Protecting Her Majesty has its own woes, but those are my woes alone to deal with. Petra acknowledged, before returning to her usual readied stance. She charged at him, running at her fullest of throttles. Whilst stunned by their first clash of swords, Hubert used her fast momentum to his advantage and leaned back, eventually motioning his equipped hand to the side. Petra noticed herself falling downwards as a result of this movement, however she quickly rolled forward, where she opened some distance between the two. She once again had charged forward, jumping over a miasma ball sent by Hubert. He noticed her dash, and knowing she would have learned from her last error, he motioned his sword to cover his upper body. Another clash was given, but as Petra landed again, Hubert had used his feet to push her away. Petra was nimble. She dodged such attempts, circled around him, and proceeded to send another flurry of swings his way. Hubert deflected all of them, however it was clear if he was to even swing at Petra, she would use that openness as an opportunity to end the battle. His best bet would have been to disarm her. How he would do it would be a tricky secret, however. As she continued her swings, he purposefully let himself be hit. The scream he had sent out was of an uncontrollable habit, letting her know she was near victory. Feeling ready to end the battle at this moment, she rushed for the final time of the match, to which she would be met with shock. Hubert used her final swing to attempt his final push. Motioning his sword to point forwards just as she gave the final blow, Petra felt as if a needle had pierced her stomach. Unfortunately, this was not a complete victory for Hubert, as he too had suffered a heavy hit on his side. They both took a moment to attend to their wounds. After grimacing through their pains, Petra got up to help her comrade. He accepted her offer, and the two silently walked back together. Thank you for the battle. It was my pleasure, he deflected. I wanted to show you that I was not an enemy to make of, regardless of where I stood. Petra felt something amiss when he said this. Looking at him, she inquired further. What are you meaning? Usually keeping his secrets to himself, Hubert felt it was right to allow her some information that night. Looking back at her first arrival, and seeing her now, he noticed Petra had gone through a lot of improvement as time had passed. You were meant to be an insurance. A hostage disguised under the name of a guest, and nothing more than a political movement to make sure Brigid would not attack us alongside Dada. I'm sure you realized that in your time at Fodlan. She was startled. With honestness, I expected for you to be keeping that information with awareness from me. I would only play the fool if I had doubted your intellect, but you've more than proved yourself to me and Lady Edelgard. You are a hostage, Petra. Suddenly, a bow was given, further startling Petra. But you have my utmost respect and gratitude for your contributions. It took some time for her to process this. Hubert picked himself up from his formal bow, continuing his walk back with Petra. For her, it was the first time someone had acknowledged the dire straits that led to her moving away from Brigid. The normal event that would take place was her being offered company and companionship, but this time she had someone deeply consider all she had sacrificed to start her new life. My grandfather said with suddenness that I was to be coming to Fodlan. It was not my choice, she recounted. But still. Professor Billet and Byleth, and many more comrades in our class have made me feel homeliness. I am liking the academy. I am glad to hear that. Should you have any request, then me and Lady Edelgard will do our best for you. Thank you. It is appreciated. They walked silently again. Finally approaching their dorms, Hubert made sure Petra had made her way back. Of course, things were not always so simple. After turning away from her, he heard her final remark. Why is it that you are untrusting for so much people? For the professors, and Ferdinand, and Linhard, and the knights, and Lady Rhea. He did not turn back. Thinking on it, this was either the impression he had given everyone, or Petra was incredibly smart in realizing this. Either way, for once, he entertained the question. A vassal of the future heiress should always be taking on such suspecting features. I believe that is my justification for all I do, and I spare no lengths to make her dreams everyone's reality. It's the duty I was trusted with years ago, and I'll see to it that it is forever accomplished. As he began to take his leave, Petra watched in silence. She closed her door, leaving herself alone. Tonight, he was unexpectedly blunt. She felt both assured and uncomfortable by this scenario. Still, the night was reaching its age. Getting herself ready, she said her farewells and made haste to sleep. Chapter 44, Not a wager, but a deal. Rhea was disappointed. Her priorities had been sent in disarray. Looking beside her, she noticed Seath displaying an irritated expression. In an attempt to take it in stride, she acknowledged whatever she could of the information given. Thank you, Shamir. Not the answer I would have wanted either, believe me, she said, shrugging. But even when asking those in the Western Church about their involvement with Lonato, I got very little. And what of the rite of rebirth and their involvement with it? Rhea asked, still hoping to salvage any good news. Anyone I questioned only got as far as telling me the names of those involved in Lonato's rebellion. You'd think that would help provide more clues, but every suspect we were able to catch onto had gone missing in action when we began to look for them. I talked with Catherine to see if we could spread our defenses across a wider area to help find them, but that would mean a lesser barrier protecting the monastery. So we would be trading our defenses at the expense of ending this mess sooner, then. Seath joined in, figuring out what Shamir had been hinting towards. More or less, yeah. Rhea sighed. As much as she wanted to end all that was threatening her peace of mind, she knew bigger priorities were at stake. In the event they invade and pass through our weakened defenses, that would mean the students would be more at risk. Even if we don't spread out the knights, that helps us appear dominant to the enemy. So my request is being rejected, then. Yes, Rhea answered, bluntly. Fair enough. Shamir shrugged, unamused. I suppose it was a predictable outcome. Just request for me if you need anything else, then. I'll be sure to do that. Until then, you are dismissed. Shamir had taken her leave. Byleth had been watching this scenario unfold. He had been asked by Edelgard and Linhard to request a visit to the Holy Mausoleum. Rhea had not minded his gaze over the situation, leading Byleth to assume she had wanted him to know this information beforehand as well. The Western Church, he asked. They are our enemies. They're a sector of the goddess teachings who differ in ideals from us. Their tactics have always been illicit, and much of their behavior has often been hostile towards the Central Church. I see. At this point, Suthies popped up, looking at Rhea with as much intimidation as she could muster. So the church is not wholly connected? I did not think they were so disjointed till now, but I suppose it could explain how Lonato was able to garner such quick support during last month's incident. Byleth had thought about Lonato's actions for a while now. Whilst he had invited those nearby his territory, his army must have been filled with supporters of the Western Church. This realization had brought a new perspective to what had happened just a few weeks ago. And what of the investigation hosted by Edelgard and Linhard? Rhea asked, diverting the topic. Are you progressing well? We wanted to request the guarding of the Holy Mausoleum. As he said this, Rhea gave an unpleasant look. We looked across the range of options given to us, and we firmly believe that the enemy is not after you, but whatever the church is guarding in the mausoleum. Before Rhea could reply, Seath interjected, now more agitated than before. Do you recall that it is sacred and forbidden grounds for the students within the monastery? Byleth answered bluntly. Yes. Have you no other clues to point elsewhere? He answered once more. Yes, however, of all the places on offer, we summarized the Holy Mausoleum to be the most valued. And you are requesting for your entire class to be undertaking its protection? He asked, however once again, Byleth failed to notice his shocked tone. From Linhard's report, we have been informed it is a wide area, Byleth explained, this time with some determination in his voice. So regardless of the severity of my request, I would like for my class to guard it. Before Seath could interject further, Rhea raised her hand for him to stop. He accepted her order, silently moving himself back. Do you promise its complete protection? Rhea asked, with a commanding tone. Yes. You will take responsibility for what happens there. Yes. Before Byleth could explain further, Suthies had interrupted him. The cowardice. They speak as if they do not trust you at all. Why give us such important roles if their surveillance is always on our tail? She ran up to Rhea and Seath, staring at them both with agitation. With all due respect, Lady Rhea. He stared at her face directly. Byleth had given off a more serious expression than usual. I believe my students are more than capable of performing well. Even those falling behind are being rigorously taught by Sister about their failings, and I firmly believe that they are more than ready to undertake the protection of the Holy Mausoleum, regardless of its confidentiality. She was taken aback by this. Suthies had also looked in amazement towards Byleth. I don't think I have ever seen you like this for anyone but your family. Is this growth? He wanted to reject her questioning, but in front of Rhea, his attempts were nigh impossible. Still, she had finally been confined. Smiling to herself, she felt alleviated as she thought of her final response to the professor. On the day of the rite of rebirth, you are free to do as you wish. Protect the Holy Mausoleum with everything you have. Understood. After the meeting had ended, everyone had returned to their usual working abode. Rhea, to her chambers, Byleth, to the classroom to organize the remaining paperwork, and Seath, towards his usual office. As this happened, a new visitor approached the underground corridors. With a polite knock, came a voice of approval. You may come in. The door opened, revealing Byleth. As she strolled into Seath's office, she took a long glance before finally braving the courage to speak. It took much effort to do as she did, however, considering she was brave enough to challenge the advisor just a few days prior, she felt it was only right that she did this. I hope I'm not bothering you, but I just wanted to say something whilst I had the chance to pass through here. You are very welcome to do so, though I must ask, is this another challenge of yours, to free Flame? Seath asked, accidentally leaking disappointment from his voice. Even still, he continued his usual writing. No, nothing like that. She stuttered, embarrassed. I just wanted to say, thank you. Oh. He stopped putting pen to paper. What brings those words to cross your lips? It's about last month, the mishap with Lonato and Ash. I wanted to let you know that without you giving me an early leave, I'd have never gotten as far as I did. If we are going to be revisiting that episode, then you should remember you were still unsuccessful, despite me granting you that leave. Hearing this had visibly stung Byleth. Seath felt he hit a nerve, but noticed she tried to regain her composure after hearing this. I get that, honestly. Still, I got to talk to Lonato, and that's what matters. Because of that, I also got to help Ash, and it was all thanks to you. Still confused by this, Seath once again inquired further. I would have expected you to be saddened after that happened. I am. He was interrupted. This time, Billet had faced the ground in guilt. I could have done a whole lot more, but I also know there's nothing I can do about it now. I'm trying my best to move on from that incident, but I wanted to visit it just one more time with you, because I really can't stress how important you were to helping me talk to Lonato. She bowed her head this time, still facing the ground. Thank you so much. He was taken aback by this. Seath, still confused, now set aside his pen and tried to motion for Billet to do away with her gesture. He was unsuccessful. I did what was best for the situation. You simply carried your duties and tried your best. Please, put your head up. Oh, right. Raising herself upwards in a quickened pace, she cracked a nervous smile. Sorry. Seath sighed. You never seemed to be a well-informed type when I first laid eyes on you. To be honest, I'm surprised you are more acutely aware than you initially out forward. Since enrolling as a professor at the academy, Billet had been quick to notice that the comparisons between her and Byleth had been constant. Everyone seemed to think she was clueless in official affairs. Whilst it annoyed her, she tried her best to retain her professionalism. I can get by if I try. I'm just not as adept at fighting as brother is. She chuckled nervously. Also, I didn't want to give you the wrong impression about me, especially with how I told you I'd take away Flame from you. I know I sounded pretty upfront that day, but I'll try my best to stay within your allowances. I don't want to force her out of you. I know my own brother would lose it if something happened to me, so I just want to make sure that if I'm going to fulfill her wish, I'll do it in a way that you allow me. Seath smiled briefly. It becomes harder to distrust you, you know that. Standing up from his chair, he offered his hand to her. Thank you for trying to put me at ease. I do not know how you plan to gain my trust, but I feel as if you won't cross any boundaries in doing so anytime soon. She stared at his hand, unsure of what to do. Admittedly, Billet was still nervous. I'll try my best. You're meant to shake it, Professor. Do not leave me embarrassed. Oh right. She quickly grabbed his palm, shaking it with ferocity. Sorry. On one day, she was brimming with confidence, but on another, Billet was seen to have her sense of security disrupted around him. Thinking on it, Seath concluded it must have been whenever her duties had overlapped with her needing to talk to him that she gained such courage to speak. You're welcome to ask favors of me anytime. That is what my job as an advisor is for, after all. Sitting back down, Seath began to return to his usual work. That's good, because I may have another favor to ask today. Is that so? He once again settled his pen. That's rather sudden a time to find yourself in trouble once more. It wasn't initially going to be my ulterior motive, I swear. Billet defended. But recently, the students in our class have been on edge with the letter and rite of rebirth this month, so I offered them a trip around the local town after it was all over. Were you hoping to obtain funding from me? Seath asked, trying to guess her plan. If possible, yes, but I wanted to ask something else. She steadied herself. Clenching her palms, she began. I wanted to ask if Flame could come with us. As she said this, she saw Seath's curious expression fade to one of lesser enthusiasm. Oh. Wait, hold on. She waved her arms frantically in defense. Don't forget I'm fully ready for you to outright reject my plan, but I also wanted to defend myself before you aimed your quiver in my direction. I'm ready and willing to hear you out, but in return, I want you to also hear my line of defense as well. I accept that deal. She now pressed forward, edging on Seath's desk in enthusiasm. He leaned back in discomfort. Hit me with your worst. Biletta's sporadic behavior was enough to make Seath grow weary of talking to her. It made sense why Flame took such an affection for her. She seemed to never dull her surroundings with boredom. All right, then. Let me begin by addressing something that has been bothering me for some time now. It has to do with you possessing the crest of flames. At this, Billet felt a pang of confusion hit her. She stepped back. What? She thought it was a joke at first. Looking at Sita's serious expression though, she noticed he was far from joking. Hold on. I think you're making a mistake. I swear only people of royalty have crests dash. That is what we all thought, yes, but do you recall the tests that Professor Hanneman did on you during your first visit to the academy? Sita asked, already knowing where he would go with this. He did it when we first came here. I didn't think anything came from it, though. It's far from a secret at this point. In fact, I made it a point to put it on you and your brother's records once I was made aware of it. I trust you will tell me no lies, so do you swear to answer my next question with honesty? Yeah. She was still confused. Do you recall your past ancestral records? If so, was there anyone of note in your lineage? Belette took a moment to think before answering. Realizing she had no answer to provide, she shook her head. No, I don't remember. My dad never talked much about our family, and the only ones close to me that I know of are brother and father. Do you see where I am going with this? She hated it, but nodding her head in frustration, Belette complied with his questioning. You can do all the good in the world, but your dubious origin will forever make me curious. Unless you can find something of note, I cannot think of allowing you outside with my sister unless I know where exactly that crest came from. Wait, but what's so important about it? It's just a crest, right? Crests often come from royalty or nobility, those are two traits neither you or your brother possess. If we also include that it is the crest of flames, a power said to come from the goddess descendants herself, it only makes me question your origin, and your intentions. She thought back to all the battles her childhood had put her through. Every so often, a flashing symbol appeared. It was one that healed the twins, whilst letting them inflict more damage than usual. They used to think nothing of it back then. I can't fault you. I want to argue, but I really can't. You are a sibling yourself. I'm sure you can understand how much it would grieve me if something were to happen to Flane. If you were in my shoes, would you see yourself trusting professors of such unknown origin? No. Belette answered truthfully. I'm glad you can agree with me. He saw her pained expression. Still, Seath knew he was correct, and Belette's cluelessness on how to fight back had only proved his point. I have an argument, but you're not gonna like it. Belette said after some time passed. Seath looked up now. What might that be? He was curious now. Looking at her, he could see Belette slowly removing her pained expression. After some seconds had passed, he saw a face of smugness on her. Not to brag, but my class can kick ass. She smiled now. I looked at their grades, and then did some snooping of my own to find out what the other classes had gotten in those exams. It turns out they got some of the highest scores of the lot. Where are you going with this? Imagine me taking the dagger on my waist and killing your sister. She said this with no hesitation. It unsettled Seath. Before he could react, however, Belette continued. I wouldn't dream of doing such a thing, but even on the slim chance I did, I know I can count on my students to protect the esteemed guest coming with us on our shopping trip. Would you agree? He stuttered. He felt he had a way to argue around her point, but with Belette being so upfront on the idea of betrayal, he was left uncomfortable by her words. Look, I know I'm completely unhinged when it comes to background. I get that I'm absolutely untrustable, and I'll probably get you and a whole bunch of other people here in danger, but I'll protect your sister with everything I have, and I'll make it my class duty to do the same. If we can bring her in one piece, then I'd love for you to fund my class trip for us. Is this a wager? No. Belette refuted. I hate gambling, so I'm calling this a deal. Seath had no words to reply. He felt defeated at such a bold trade. Even though she seemed nonchalant in her ways, he felt that Belette was far more primed than she let on. In any given situation, he would have rejected such a wager. Today was not the best of days. He had plenty of paperwork to do, Byleth had breached Ria's goodwill and felt he could go into unrestricted areas, and a professor of the academy he worked in had just threatened his sister's life. All this had happened in just one day, yet he also felt he could be generous. You really have a roundabout method of approaching this, don't you? He chuckled, unexpectedly. All right, then. Keep Flane safe, and I'll fund your trip. I know you care for your students, so that at least confirms you won't try anything dangerous with my sister. Thank you, sir. As she was about to bow her head, Seath quickly alarmed her not to. Let's drop some level of formality, please. I'm no royal, and neither am I the archbishop. All right. Seath, my dude dash. Just by my name alone, please. Right dash Billette once again stammered, but after realizing she had gotten what she wanted, a smile crept up on her face. It was an earnest one that would warm the heart of anyone that was nearby. I'm glad. I'll do everything I can to prove myself to you. I'll let things go my way for once. She noticed it was her time to take her leave once more. As Billette kept waving her nervous goodbyes to the advisor, she chuckled nervously, before beginning to close the door. Wait, Seath sounded. Billette opened the entrance slightly, ready to hear his final words. Keep yourself safe. A moment passed before a response was said. Billette opened the door even more now. Where's this coming from? You misunderstand, Professor, Seath refuted, realizing immediately what the implications had sounded like. It's just that Flane has taken a liking to you. Of everyone in the monastery, she was overjoyed when she found you never intended to leave us. For her sake, please do not try anything dangerous. He felt embarrassed saying such words. Nevertheless, he knew that if Flane was happy, then his peace of mind would be as well. You care a lot more than you let on, you know that? It's sweet. Once again, Billette gave her usual earnest smile. Don't worry. The day anything happens to Flane is the day I'll be beside myself in agony. I promise you that. And I'll make it through this month with shining colors for her. That is all I can ask for. Thanks for looking out for me, though. Billette slowly closed the door to impart her final words. Even if you're just making sure I'm safe for Flane's sake, it makes me feel like I'm wanted here. I couldn't ask for more. Those words, along with the shutting of the door, rang aloud to Seath. He was planning to once more return to his work, but he felt motionless at her departure. Staring at the hands that shook hers, it took him a moment to piece what she was implying. It's as if she's the perfect professor. I wondered how long she'd last, but I suppose just this once, I'll admit defeat. During this time of broad daylight, sat a girl, scribbling notes from pen to paper frantically across her book. She wanted a place where there was complete silence. Even at the offer of using her friend's own dorms, she refused such kindness. Just this once, the girl wanted to be by herself. She had managed to find a place not used by many. It was farther from the academy grounds, but just nearby the library that she could make a quick trip if she needed to validate her facts. A small tree such as this was rarely used, so she took her time to sit beside it. When a familiar face noticed her, he sat across the same tree. Taking out his own book, he began to make idle chatter. You're really giving it your all, Dorothea, Linhard observed, amused. It's commendable. She took notice of him. Still not ready to look away from her work, she tried her best to respond to Linhard's small talk. I want to do my best. Everyone's been helping me improve, and I know I can do better if I just try. That's commendable. You already said that. I was reiterating my prior point. She continued looking over her work, busily trying her best to study both forms of magic. Whilst not typically her forte, Dorothea wanted to believe that the help she gained had restored her faith in the goddess somehow. Even if it was just an ounce of hope they have given her, she wanted to use it to fully understand and comprehend the goddess' teachings. She put the book away. The circle was fully illustrated in her guidebook, tempting her to try a new spell. It was one that could heal its user, whilst providing some inoffensive front in the process. The spell name, Nosferatu. She wanted its help so that she wouldn't worry those around her. As she took a deep breath, she tried her hardest to concentrate, only being able to make half a circle, which only poured out the tiniest of golden droplets below. You would need a tome for something such as that, Linhard suggested. Trust me. I highly doubt it's in your forte to do such tricks. Why do you think that? Dorothea asked, breathless. She had tried this spell once before, and even still it had failed to recognize her wishes. Even if she was without a tome, Dorothea had been sure she could prevail with all the knowledge she had learnt. Linhard, however, had a different view. "It's because you're a commoner," he said with no hesitation, knowing very well that his next words would hurt her in the end. "And an orphan. Those two traits don't match, especially since you had no one of importance to be teaching you anything past your current needs." At this, she finally looked up at him, annoyed. She stood up, walked to him, and stared at his eyes intently. Linhard did not so much as flinch. "I'm impressed you can say something like that to my face. I simply observed and made an evaluation. That's what it boils down to, and your lack of fighting back can suggest I was right on that front. Give me one reason not to punch you, Lin." Dorothea threatened, this time showing a much more serious expression than she usually would. A sigh was given off. "You've heard it, too, haven't you?" Linhard elaborated. "The sounds of knights and students alike questioning your legitimacy. I already know of how you got into the academy because of such rumors. However, so too do I know of your deepest fallings. You don't feel complete here. That fact is something I'm sure of. You can try all you want, but nothing you do will rid you of those rumors." Dorothea's eyes widened. Looking at the floor, she grunted in frustration. Any past hostilities she had were now ceased. She slumped onto the ground, looking at her shaken hands. It was these hands that had gotten her so far, but so too was she not proud of them. "How do you do it, Linhard?" "Do what?" "How can you walk off your failures without so much as a glance? You failed the test, too, didn't you?" "That, I did dash. So why are you so relaxed?" This time, she shouted, facing Linhard with desperation. Still, he did not take a moment to answer, for Linhard already knew his reasoning. "I told you on the day of our exams, worrying can only get you so far. When something dire has already passed, then all you can do is think of a counter-plan. What about if the thing worrying you still stays with you?" Dorothea argued. "I can't get rid of the fact that I'm a commoner. I can't get rid of the fact that I got into this academy illegitimately. I can't get rid of the fact that I'm horrible at learning dash. That's true, but you can ignore what people expect from you, and you can move elsewhere, to a place you seek actual comfort in. You'd know about that, wouldn't you?" "I would, actually." He settled his book aside, facing Dorothea, offering his hand to her. "Everyone expects so much of me. Edelgard, Professor Byleth, Casper, and maybe even you in some respects. I can only do so much with what I'm motivated to accomplish, and I make that a fact to those around me. I couldn't care less about titles, or responsibilities, so long as I can do what I personally want in life." Dorothea took some time to take this information in. For the first time in her life at the academy, she got a much clearer picture of Linhard than ever before. She felt as if she was the first one he had relayed these thoughts to, and because of that, she felt she had no place to argue back. "It's very different to your circumstances, isn't it?" Linhard continued. "You worked because you cared about your appearance. You did everything you could just to wipe the stains that society had dirted you with, and because of that, you're being left with stress and anxiety as a result of wanting to be rid of it all. I can't envy you in the slightest." She felt he had hit a weak point of Dorothea's. He was entirely correct, but so too was he completely wrong. Dorothea took some time to reflect. He was the only one to make such observations, and because of that, she now felt unsafe around him. Of all the ones to find out the most about her, Dorothea never imagined Linhard would be one of them. "I just want to secure my happiness." "Is that so much to ask?" "I can't imagine why not," Linhard answered. "And I have no right to argue against one's way of life. Do as you wish, but just this once, remember my advice this time." He noticed Dorothea was not planning to take his hand anytime soon. Sighing to himself, he took back his book from the ground and began his walk away from his usual reading spot. Looking back, he noticed she still had a dissatisfied face. Still, as he had said before, he felt it was not his concern. He could only try to help her when he felt it best, and it was ultimately down to Dorothea as to how she would approach her problems. She already had a treasured friend in the academy to help her, so he trusted she was not doomed to misery just yet. The answer isn't as clear-cut as you thought it once was. I know you'll find it, the answer to your happiness. Chapter 45, One Final Meeting. The Rite of Rebirth festival was to take place in just over a week. Byleth, Edelgard, and Linhard had already achieved what they wished to do. At the very peak of the morning's shine, Byleth had been waiting eagerly for his fellow researchers to join him for one last meeting. The door opened to the classroom, revealing Edelgard. She brought herself inside, sitting down on her usual seat. They waited for a bit longer. This time, Linhard arrived. He came later than they initially arranged, but also earlier than usual. It was a strange middle ground to have settled himself in, but it was acceptable for now. Linhard, noticing the classroom was mostly empty as a result of today being a weekend, sat himself next to Edelgard. She was surprised at first, but his reasoning for it being easier to converse in this way had settled her doubts. Finally, having the preparations finally completed, Byleth approached his students, handing them 2 bags for their perusal. What are these? Edelgard asked, bewildered. Sister wanted to reward you, Byleth answered back. She said it was unfair that you were forced into such a task this month, so she parted ways with some of her own convoy to reward you both. Smart, Linhard commented. I'm glad she understands I'm an enigma. Giving me money lessens the chances of disappointment. Linhard. Edelgard exclaimed. Okay, I know that was arrogant for me to say, but our professor is blunt as a stick. I'm sure he would agree with me. The two looked on at their professor, to which he nodded. A sigh came. Very well, Edelgard accepted her defeat, albeit reluctantly. It is a very generous portion of gold you are giving us. Did Rhea ask for this to be done? It was all sister's doing, as I said. Granted, should we succeed this month, I fear she would already be spoiling you all with her planned outing. Not that I'm personally curious, but do you even know where everyone's going? Linhard asked. No, Byleth answered. Yet another reason I don't want to attend. He sighed in return. Surprises are such a hassle. Regardless of their plans for this month, the two put aside their earnings. They tried to behave themselves, knowing that this meeting was not specifically for them to obtain their rewards. Byleth walked back to his desk, Suthi's figment popping beside him to watch out of curiosity. She was tired as usual from such an early morning, but so too did she want to see what was about to take place. I have talked with Rhea. We will be guarding the Holy Mausoleum next week. A smile came from Linhard when announcing this, followed by a suspicious look from his peer beside him. That said, Seath gave us some instructions on how we are to go about it. I will reiterate this point later as well, but it only applies to a few of our selected students, being to not touch anything of value under any means, lest you risk expulsion. As he said this, a saddened look appeared on Linhard, whilst Edelgard could only smugly taunt him. What next, though? Edelgard asked, to which Byleth swiveled his head sideways. There is not much else. You two were granted permission to be relieved from your duties until the festival, so signing up for guarding the premises with everyone else is completely optional for you two. The Archbishop felt it was only right to make it that way, since you were both working more than the others during this month's time. Silence had fallen for a moment. Before speaking up, the two looked at one another in confusion. Finally, there was an array of mixed reactions from the both of them. Thank goodness! Linhard exclaimed. The amount of reading I've missed this month is incredibly dissatisfactory. Don't even get me started on the sleep you've made me lose out on. Even still, I think I'd like to help with the guarding of the monastery. Can I sign up with anyone in our class? Edelgard asked. Ferdinand still has an empty spot, if it interests you, Byleth pointed out. Oh. Edelgard grimaced. He's going to make this a competition. I can already tell. Yeah, well you can back out on it if you want, you know. Linhard pointed out, trying to silence his usual yawns. I can't shirk my duties. Not yet, anyway. I won't choose to compel you otherwise, then. Finally standing up, Linhard gave a wave to both his professor and peer. Unfortunately, the only one to wave back instead of looking in confusion was the girl he could not see in the first place, being Suthi's. Opening the door of the classroom, he smiled. It was a sense of relief he had been longing for during the wider duration of this month. Should we not chase him back here? Edelgard asked Byleth. He could only stare back. I see, Suthi's appeared. That must have annoyed her. I've never seen such a face of vexation on her before. Vexation? Byleth asked. Ah, you are still new to the emotional understanding topic. Allow me to explain. Suthi's flew beside the door, feeling pride for being more knowledgeable than Byleth on this rare occasion. Since the beginning, these two have been clashing in personalities on several occasions. Would you not think a hard-working individual such as our house leader would feel some disengagement when working with a lazy one such as Linhard? I would not think so. Ugh. Suthi's replied. Denseness aside, these two may struggle together later on as a result. Should we not interject? Why? Byleth asked. I do not see it as our priority. By this point, Suthi's gave up. I should really consider figuring out how to be Baletta's vessel instead of deciphering my past one of these days, she grumbled. Byleth was unfortunately fixated on something else entirely as she said this. Noticing Edelgard running after Linhard out of the classroom, he stealthily followed after her from behind. Suthi's words may not have interested him, but instead, he had wanted to see how exactly their split personalities might have clashed with one another. If what she said was true, then he wanted to see how, unlike how he and his sister would accommodate one another, how would two sides interact if they were both so different, yet too stubborn to set aside their differences. He knew it was a selfish desire to research such a topic, but as he explained this to Suthi's flying beside him, he was surprised to see she was wholeheartedly approving of this endeavor. Catching up, they neared the Black Eagle's dormitory hall. Before Linhard could enter, he waited for Edelgard to run after her. Noticing she wanted to speak with him, he impatiently gave her a stare begging her to make the conversation quick. Linhard, before you depart for the morning, I wanted to ask if you wanted to join me as well in guarding the monastery. Pray tell, why? By this point, Byleth chose to watch from afar. He was still within earshot, but the two had been so invested in their own interaction that they did not notice their professor using them for his own unethical viewing. Frankly speaking, Ferdinand would be a bother to work with. I noticed we coordinated well together when put under the same task, so I was thinking we could put those prior skills to the test. Bowing her head, Edelgard smiled as she propped herself up. If you choose to accept, then I can only apologize for the pestering I had given you ever since our classes began. I'd have to offer you my sincerest of sorries for not letting you do as you wish, because it would also have meant you could set aside your own interests if those you cared for needed your help. Linhard was amused by this proposal. It was earnest, and he knew that much. Even still, her phrasing the request in such a way meant that dealing with it would be much more of a hassle. I notice that me saying I'll apologize to you if you fulfill what I want is slightly unbecoming, so allow me to fix that plan, Edelgard continued, correcting herself. I'm sorry for having annoyed you so early on, but I enjoy working with you, so can you please reconsider joining me to work again? I'd be grateful. No. Silence fell. Edelgard took a moment to think. Once a moment passed, she extended it to a minute. As the seconds passed, the two stared at each of their faces, confused. Having done such a tactically polite approach, being rejected outright had made Edelgard only more confused. Excuse me. Edelgard finally spoke up. I appreciate the praise, and trust me on this, you asking something of me nicely is much better than the harassment I received prior to all the nagging prior to this month, but in return, it only makes it so much harder to reject your offer. I can't work with you, because I simply do not want to. It's as simple as that. But dash. I understand what you are trying to say. As the heir of the Empire, you see your duties to be of an absolute priority, but that's not the case for me. I'm one of many nobles. What I do doesn't matter. Even if it did, then someone else would pick up my work for me. I dash. Is that all you want to ask of me? Linhard asked, finally stopping Edelgard dead in her tracks. She looked down on the floor. First, it was out of guilt, then a realization dawned on her, and it turned to frustration rather quickly. This time, she did not let the silence his words caused to pass even 10 seconds. She stared at him, trying her best to calm the inner turmoils in her voice. You don't exactly want to help anyone, do you? I don't. And neither were you ever an ally. You were just doing this out of duty. I thought that was already obvious. He confirmed, puzzled. Escaping Professor Byleth and Rhea is far too demanding. Especially when you consider the rumors surrounding Seath and his work ethic. I had to give up and get my meetings with you and the professor done as soon as possible. You never even arrived on time for those duties in the first place. Edelgard stated, now slowly letting the irritation in her voice leak. Yes, but I blame that on having to adjust my sleeping habits to being such a bother. It's much harder than it looks, believe it or not. You gave it your all just to return to your own dwellings? You never wanted anything to do with us in the first place. Linhard nodded, upsetting Edelgard further. The Archbishop's life is at stake. The monastery is in danger, and everyone's scared for their future's likelihood, and yet you're here doing this because you have nothing better to do? You don't care for our time here at all, do you? You've put words in my mouth for that last point, but yes, I believe everything's going to be resolved regardless, anyway, so it isn't a massive concern. Why don't you see your own value? Edelgard now had raised her voice. You choose all day, every day, to spend your time dwelling in some research that only you find comfort in. What comes after? Have you thought of a future? What next after you've torn us all away just to find some meager solace? How about instead of simply going through such lengths to rid us all so you can continue your work, you find a balance? Why don't you ever listen to my advice, and just do what is required of you as a result of attending this academy? All this for what? Your own greedy interests. I'd hardly call studying for the retake greedy, Linhard commented. Edelgard was stumped for a moment. Rummaging through this pocket, Linhard took out a book. It was the one book he had been reading for the entire of this month. I'd been reading through all night, completely forgetting our meeting today. All I've been consuming this month has been this awful book, and you have no idea how exhausting it is to forego my usual interests just to deal with this inconvenience. It was initially to get you off my back, but having seen Dorothea's efforts, I would have felt bad if I didn't give my all besides her. I couldn't make her lonely, after all. He passed it towards her. Looking at it, Edelgard realized what it was. A book he had borrowed from the library, and one detailing the best methods in passing Linhard's failed certification exam correctly. Taking a moment to look at it, she realized she had misjudged the situation severely. Ever since she told him to stop reading in their first library meeting, to their final assembly today, Linhard had been studying this all along. Before she could apologize, Linhard spoke after taking his research back. Now it's my turn to get mad at you. I'd say that's only fair. This time, Edelgard was surprised to find that he was displaying an annoyed face for the first time since they attended the academy. If you think that we all attended this place to fulfill the agenda only you and a select few others wanted to fulfill, then you're wrong. I came here for my own research, and I like to think I'm using my time wisely. For the past few months, I've put up with your rigorous lectures, taunts, and insults, ignoring it to the best of my ability, but I think now is a time I try and stop it. How long would it take for you to realize forcefully dragging me away from what I love would accomplish nothing? I can choose to do what I want, because I seriously doubt it would harm anyone. Yet here you are, proudly parading your own ideals, looking down with such eagerness on anyone, specifically me, on if we don't conform to your own etiquette. I'm aware my studies aren't massively important in the context of today's Fodlan, but have you ever considered how I felt about that fact? Am I not allowed to love researching my odd factoids and the significance surrounding it because I genuinely have a passion for it? Why is it that I need to reform myself to the expectations set by those around me? On that note, let's not get started on you of all people. For a princess, let alone future emperor, you handled my disagreement with you in the most appalling way possible. I too greatly enjoyed working with you, but even I knew it wouldn't last. If you're going to always be like this, then it's not worth working together like this in the first place. By now, he opened the door for the dorm hallway. Looking back at Edelgard, he pocketed his book back from where it came. He saw he had guilted her, but did not care for it at the moment. Without waiting for a response, closed the door, leaving her alone. Byleth had watched it all unfold. He and Suthies had silently laid eyes upon the entire ordeal. As the door closed, and a calm had settled beside Edelgard, he noticed her face looking towards the ground. She gritted her teeth, before finally letting it go. Sighing, she walked away. Byleth noticed she had been looking for something. Thankfully, her efforts were successful. Edelgard found a bench. She sat down, silently gazing at the campus before her. He approached her. "What are you planning to say to her?" Suthies asked. "I do not know." His response surprised Suthies. "I have always struggled with emotions. Seeing this entire event take place in front of me is just as confusing as it has always been with me and sister. I want to believe, however, that there is a way to fix this. Emotions are not logical, but they still have their patterns. I understand Edelgard as a person, so I will try to help her. Not because you're a professor, or because it is your duty." "No," Byleth said. He never expected him to ever say such words. Time after time, all he did was a result of it being needed to be done. The only exception back then was him wanting to help his sister, however this had never resulted in much. His attempts to calm distress were always futile, and yet this time, he felt he might have a small chance to do something. "I am doing it because I have a chance to help her." When he responded with this, Suthies smiled. "For once, you have not annoyed me. Go on, then. Prove to me that I too can find growth in a person such as you." He did as he was told. He silently looked at Edelgard. She noticed him, turned to him, then went back to face frontwards towards the campus. Byleth sat down, uninvited. "Everyone who fell for you is relying on you," Byleth said. "The reason you as well had obtained that crest was a result of that reliance. Is that what you believe?" "You're only partly right," Edelgard said. "Nobody knows what's in store for them. Whether it be good or bad, everyone is completely clueless. Even if I have the smallest difference in having an insight to the future, I want to do all I can to benefit everyone, but it's harder than it looks. Is that the right mentality in being a future emperor?" "I thought it was," she replied, truthfully. Once again, she sighed. Looking at the hands that had picked up Linhard's book, she could only feel guilt at her aggression to him. "I made Linhard upset today. I didn't understand his situation because he never told me about it fully." "You were never privy to that information to begin with," Byleth pointed out. "And yet I was completely in the wrong." Edelgard now did not face forwards, but instead at the blue sky above them. "Tell me, Professor. Have you ever done something that you believed was completely in the best interest of someone?" He gave this question some thought before replying, "I have." "Has it ever failed?" "It has." "How did it fail?" Byleth once more faced Edelgard. He truthfully did not want to tell this story, but somehow, he thought it would help her. So, he began. "Sister never liked fighting. Me or father could never help her. As mercenaries, she suffered every day during our younger years as a result." Edelgard was surprised to hear Byleth talk of his sister. Thinking back on it, she supposed it made sense. After all, she must have been the one he conversed with the most. "Even now, I can never understand her. One day, however, I told her to stop being upset about having blood on her hands. I told her that her acting this way was only to the benefit of no one but herself, and that all she did would only make her life harder than it already was. She looked at me the entire time, completely silent. At some point, as I was lecturing her, her face had teared up without me realizing at the time. I never thought that Professor Billet would have such a side to her," Edelgard thought aloud. "How did she respond?" "She punched me," Byleth reminisced. "It was our first and only physical fight. I overwhelmed her, battering and bruising her. At some point, her nose was dripping only with blood. She would scream at some point, begging me to stop, saying she was sorry." I continued. "Father saw the latter part of the exchange take place at some point, and he had slapped me. I saw her bruised face as he pushed me away. At the time, a fight earlier had forced her to cut her hair in an effort to escape her end, so all I saw of her that day was nothing but her face. She shouted at me, telling me this was the reason she hated doing what we did. Me and father watched, unable to help her. She continued, begging for the pain to subside. Father eventually took her elsewhere to calm down, and I was left, confused. I was not allowed to talk to her that day, and neither did she want to for a while. The next morning, I awoke. She acted completely normal. She smiled when she saw me, ignoring the bandage on her nose. I asked if she was all right, and she said she was. After which, she said not to talk of the drama that took place the day before, because she had forgiven me. Even still, when we ate our breakfast, and later traveled beside each other, I realized I never helped her. She did everything herself, and strengthened her own resolve simply to continue what we wanted of her. Byleth now looked at Edelgard. She had a face of shock. His story had shocked her, but it was also clear to him that she wanted him to continue it. I thought she would continue feigning ignorance, but then we arrived at the academy. The sister I see at the academy is not only committed, but also happy. I have never seen her smile quite so much. She always did everything for no one but herself, and being a professor had fit into that niche spectacularly. Realizing he was going off topic, Byleth finally decided to reach a conclusion. I never helped sister. She found her own happiness, because those around her could never provide it. Oh, was all Edelgard could say. Suthies, too, had been captivated from this story. She walked closer to Byleth, staring into his deadpan eyes. Do you feel remorse over doing such a thing? She asked her vessel. No reply. She was about to conclude this answer as one of his usual ones, but rather than speaking, Byleth continued looking back at Edelgard. She was short, so he had to look slightly down to face her at eye level, but he wanted to give his piece of guidance regardless. You know it, too, that an emperor needs to take unorthodox decisions for the benefit of her and her people. Yes. Using her hand, she displayed the crest of flames from her palm. As it vanished, she looked at Byleth again. I'm painfully aware of it. Sometimes, even if you are wanting to help, it is better to simply leave someone alone, lest you think force is the true solution possible. Now, Byleth pieced together his lecture to make sense. I could never do anything for sister, and yet she managed everything on her own. If you were to regard Linhard as a trusted ally, then would you place the level of understanding I was not able to give sister during her time of need for it? To understand. Linhard? How? She gave it some more thought. At this point, it was clear Byleth would not speak up any longer, so she was once again by herself. This time, though, Edelgard felt that the boost she was given was enough to help her get through her grief. Professor Billette was able to find her own happiness and place of belonging. I suppose. Linhard, too, had mentioned his research was never widely focused upon, and yet he believed it was of some use. She stopped. Breathing slightly louder, Edelgard widened her eyes at a solution. A smile came. Byleth, too, watched this realization hit her. Noticing his job was done, he left her. No words of goodbye were said. She was at first startled by his sudden exit, but so too was Edelgard, too occupied in her thoughts to chase after him. Suthies ran after her vessel, slightly confused, but also heavily enlightened. You won't admit it, but I believe that you do care about hurting your sister after all. Suthies guessed. How comforting. I never answered you earlier, did I not? Forgive me for that. You have a habit of it. She smiled, smugly. I've grown used to it. No. This time, I needed to answer you properly, Byleth interrupted. He did as Edelgard had done once before, looking at the skies above him in puzzlement. I do not know if the regret I feel is because the circumstances could have been better, or because I truly cared for sister's well-being. Of course you do. She rejected his meager thoughts. Your siblings. And yet I'm the most inhuman human beings alive, Byleth concluded. Suthies silenced herself, taking a moment to contemplate that Byleth had noticed this predicament long before anyone else. I'm the most inhuman brother of the most humane sister. Try as I might, I could never fully understand her, and those feelings of regret could just as well be a result of a better objective outcome. She did not like receiving such a response. Of all the times you answer my questions, why do you do so at the most painful of ways? She retorted, saddened. She tried to comfort Byleth, but her hand phased through his shoulder. The only way they could be in contact was through their own dreams. Still, she tried once more to help him. If you lack basic empathy, then I shall be there to fill that role. Saying this, Suthis chuckled. She remembered how she used to hate being beside him. For my first act of judgment, I would like to believe that you did indeed feel guilt for your sister, because you yourself care for her. But we can never truly know. That is just the way of life, Suthis remarked. Sometimes, life never gives us the answers. We are told to piece everything with small fragments of what's available, and provide an answer from there on. As a result, we will never truly know what is right and wrong. Byleth took this into consideration. Suthis spoke truth in her words. He nodded, accepting her proposal to be his lack of emotional value. I trust you, Suthis. As I, for you, she replied. We are one and the same, are we not? Whether we like it, we will always be conjoined together, so it is good we are finding value in each other's company during this time. I agree. Always one for short remarks, Suthis sighed. This was yet another trait of his that annoyed her to no end. She felt so at this instance, but she tried to let it go. She understood now what he had been going through, so she knew it was best not act ignorant. Floating beside him, the two went back, ready to complete their remaining duties for the day. As they walked away, a figure walked out towards Edelgard. Offering her a hand, she picked it up. Hubert, how long have you been here? Since you sat yourself on that bench. He answered, lying. Truthfully, he had been there since the meeting had begun. The professor gave you some sound advice. I can tell you that much. I do not know what you will do with that information, but like always, your judgment is always best, Lady Edelgard. Thank you. She looked around her surroundings. I'm grateful that you've always been there for me, even when I didn't notice it. That will always be the case, whether you like it or not, he said. You still have much you want to do before leaving this world. It is my job to help you achieve those goals, whilst ensuring your safety to make it so far. Yes, thank you. Let us be off, Hubert commanded. He left, expecting Edelgard to follow. He was right. Footsteps followed behind him, and the two departed ways. Check the description for the links to the author.